Hello everyone, and welcome to Right Wing Rising. Please be sure to like this video down below before you are finished watching, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So in today's installment of my 240 to Win series, we're going to be talking about the state of Oregon. Much like Colorado, which was the state of focus in my last video, Oregon voted red for nearly 40 years, voting for Republicans in every presidential election since World War II, with the exception of 1964 when it went to Lyndon Johnson in his landslide re-election victory. But following the Reagan years, it voted blue in 1988 and has gone in the liberal direction in every election since then. At the turn of the century, George W. Bush lost it by a mere 7,000 votes in 2000. But despite the national popular vote moving almost 3 points in the Republican direction in 2004, it actually trended to the left as Bush lost the state by nearly 4 more points than he did against Gore in 2000. And it actually marked the last presidential election where Oregon was considered a swing state, as Obama went on to win the state by 14 points and 12 points in 2008 and 2012, respectively. In 2016, Trump got that margin of defeat down to 11 points, but lost it by a whopping 16 points in 2020 as it swung massively in the Democrats' direction. However, it is expected that the state will swing to the right this year and perhaps be closer to a 10-point win for the Democrats rather than going to them by a large margin of 15 points or more, just like it did 4 years ago. There have been some positive electoral signs for Republicans in the state in the last few years, and even CNN and some other election analysis outlets that are not exactly conservative do not have Oregon as a safe Democrat state. They still have it in the Democrat column, but they have it more as lean to likely. Now, I do not think it will be under 10 points, but I do think it could swing back to the 2016 margin that Trump lost it by. And there are plenty of reasons that I think that will be the case. Republicans only lost the popular vote for the House of Representatives in 2022 by merely 8 points, a close margin for Oregon's standards. And also that year, the GOP nominee only lost the governor race by 3.5 points. Granted that there was a left-wing third-party candidate that pulled a lot of votes away from the Democrats to help Republicans get closer, but the Republicans still garnered 44% of the vote, which was still a good performance by them, especially when you compare it to Trump only getting 39% in 2016 and 40% in 2020. If Trump gets in the low to mid-40s, like Republicans did in the midterms, the state would be all but certain to only vote for Harris by around 10 points or maybe even less than 10 points. When you take into account the third-party vote share at the presidential level this year, which will mostly be pulling from Harris's vote total, and the Independent Party of Oregon endorsed Biden in 2020 but is not backing Harris this time. The one poll that has been conducted of this state since Harris became the Democratic nominee only had her leading by 5 points against Trump, who was at 44%. And you could take this as an outlier poll, but that number is actually spot on with the numbers that Republicans were getting in the 2022 elections that we just discussed. So I think there is more validity to that poll that many are giving it credit for. Ever since 2020, the largest and most liberal city in the state of Oregon, that being Portland, has had a decreasing population thanks to high cost of living and rampant crime and homelessness that the very progressive mayor does nothing to curb. And despite its overall Democratic lean, the state has some very Republican areas. Basically, the entire eastern and southwestern sides of the state vote red every election. So there's a deep divide between the rural and urban areas, as is typical in most states. But in this case, it makes the state a lighter shade of blue than many assume, as Republican areas actually do a decent job at offsetting the pull that Portland has. Not to the extent to make it a toss-up state, but definitely to the point of giving Republicans a chance to be competitive at some levels in the state, and giving them a foothold to make electoral gains into the future. Because Republicans, especially in the Trump era, actually have a decent amount to work with in this state. The majority of Oregon's land is farmland and forests, but only 20% of the population lives outside of the urban and suburban areas. There are around 40,000 farms in the state, and while they combine to have a diverse, wide range of food products, they are mainly known for producing hazelnuts and Christmas trees, and forestry and fishing are also key parts of the economy. The majority of people that are employed in these type of working class jobs favor Republicans in the last decade. So if this demographic in more rural areas come out in higher numbers to vote for Donald Trump on Election Day to max out his margins in the conservative parts of the state, this is key to him rebounding from his landslide loss here to Joe Biden in 2020. The Democrats' entire margin of victory comes from two neighboring counties in the northwestern corner: Multnomah County, which houses the city of Portland, and Washington County, which contains the city of Hillsborough. If Trump can narrow his loss in these two places, the state will get much closer. Hillsborough is a high-tech manufacturing hub, mainly for electronics. Trump's focus on the economy and manufacturing might help him pick off some voters in such a county. And Portland will probably shift Republican by default due to population loss and decreased voter turnout from the sky-high levels it attained in 2020. Combine this strategy with Trump looking to flip back the counties of Deschutes, which is the home to the city of Bend, and Marion County, home to the capital city of Oregon, that being Salem. He actually won these two places in 2016. I know it's hard to believe Republicans actually winning the capital city of a state. That's very rare. That being said, Biden was able to pick off these two counties in 2020. Trump is looking to take them back this year and make them red once again, which alone would narrow Harris's statewide margin by tens of thousands of votes, since Bend and Salem are major cities in the state that are not as blue as most. This is a very real and realistic pathway for Trump to get in the mid-40s in the state of Oregon this November, shifting it to the right by at least 2 to 3 points, and making his loss there only about 10 points. And this would be a very positive thing for Oregon Republicans, because this would happen by Trump making inroads in the state, doing better in Democrat areas, solidifying the Republican areas, and leading conservatives to a bounce-back performance in the swing areas of the state. And it also would be extremely helpful for Republican candidates in key down-ballot races taking place on the same ballot as the presidential election this fall. Elections for both branches of the state legislature, several statewide offices, and all 6 congressional districts in the state are taking place in Oregon, all of which contain either some complete toss-up races or at least some elections that will be somewhat competitive. Starting with the state Senate elections, Democrats currently hold a 17-13 majority. It was previously an 18-12 edge before Republicans picked up one seat in the 2022 midterms. How the elections work for this branch of government in Oregon is that half of the Senate districts are up in the midterms and half of them are up during presidential years. So the seats that held elections in 2022 will not be holding elections this time around. It will be the other half. And Republicans are at a severe disadvantage this time around. In this past legislative session, Republicans walked out of the legislature and did not show up for votes in order to block pro-abortion and pro-transgender legislative measures that Democrats were trying to pass through. Since Oregon law says that 2/3 of state senators have to be present for a quorum to exist, that being the minimum number of members that must be present to conduct business and hold votes. So Republicans did that so a quorum could not be met and the bills could not be passed. But Democrats struck back at Republicans, and along with labor unions, they implemented new walkout rules that would bar from re-election any state senators that had walked out 10 or more times in order to block bills. And given that most Republicans had already infringed on this new rule, they were barred from re-election. And hence, most Republicans that are up for re-election this year have been forced into retirement, unable to run again, throwing the GOP's state Senate campaign into chaos. Democrats go on and on about Trump being a threat to democracy, and yet they undo rules that are put in place to protect against one-party rule and legislation being pushed through at breakneck speed by one party, with the other party having no input. A tradition, such as having a quorum to pass legislation, is there to make sure that a law so radical that it is opposed by every single member of one party does not get passed by the state legislature. But Democrats did that so they could ram through every bill that they want and take away the ability of Republican lawmakers to actually give their constituents a voice in the state government. Overall, a really shady and very anti-democratic move by the Democrat Party. Par for the course. To make things worse, thanks to redistricting, Democrats have made a current Republican seat into a new blue district. So they are guaranteed at least one gain, maybe even two, with a toss-up seat up for grabs. So Republicans have no real path to the state Senate majority under the current state Senate district map. And especially with many Republican incumbents forced into retirement, the best they can hope for is to keep the Democrats' majority where it is, or at the bare minimum, lose just one seat. So it doesn't look good for Republicans on that front. But fortunately, the prospects for the GOP in the state House are a little bit more positive. Democrats narrowly hold a 35-25 majority in the state House. Republicans gained a net 2 seats in the midterms and only lost the popular vote by around 5%, a really narrow margin in Oregon. And 2/3 of the closest districts in that election were ones Democrats barely held on to, giving the Republicans more seats this time that they can target to pick up than Democrats have. And Republicans only need to pick up 5 or 6 seats to have the majority. The GOP does have 5 close seats to defend, so it is possible they could lose ground. But unlike in the state Senate, at least they have the potential to make gains, if not have a chance to control the chamber after this election, which is pretty incredible considering that Oregon is considered a safe Democrat state. And especially if Trump makes improvements in Oregon, it could open the door for Democrats to really start sweating about their control of the state House. So that is definitely a big down-ballot race to watch. Because if Republicans could gain control of one branch of government, that would go a long way toward giving Republicans momentum for the future and stopping liberal legislation from being passed. There are also 3 statewide races taking place for the state government in Oregon. First, at the treasurer position, this is an open seat with the incumbent not running for re-election. Historically, this race is closer than other statewide elections, where Republicans are normally competitive to some degree. It is usually within 10 points, and the current Democratic treasurer won by just over 10 points in 2020. That being said, the Republican nominee is a state senator barred from running for re-election, so his controversial image could hamper the GOP and possibly drag down the vote. Or he could be motivated to get back at the corrupt state government and the Democratic Party that put that rule in place and run a great campaign to win and pull off an upset. I guess both are possible outcomes to some degree, but that is definitely a statewide race that has a good chance to be within 10 points in Oregon. In the race for Secretary of State, this is another election where the incumbent is retiring, not running for re-election, but the current state treasurer is the Democratic nominee for this office. It's another statewide election in Oregon that is usually closer than people would expect it to be. It went blue by only 8 points in 2012. It actually voted red in 2016. I know, that's very shocking. And flipped back to the Democrats by only 7 points in 2020. So this is probably Republicans' best chance for victory in the state government. And it is still a long shot at that, but don't be surprised if, at worst, for the GOP, it is around a 7 to 8 point election loss and could be even closer. Finally, in the election for Attorney General, yet again a third straight case of the Democrat incumbent retiring. But that might not make too big of a difference, because this office always goes to Democrats by a wider margin for some reason, of typically around 15 points. The Democratic nominee is the House Majority Leader, so yet again another Democratic candidate with a lot of name recognition. Republicans did do very well in primary turnout compared to past years, but I would be surprised if this was an election decided by less than 10 points. Finally, in the elections for the House of Representatives from the state of Oregon, there are 3 competitive House districts. The 4th Congressional District only voted for the longtime Democrat incumbent by 5 points in 2020, but it got bluer in redistricting and voted for the new Congresswoman, Val Hoyle, by 7.5. The redrawn district also voted for Biden by 12.5 points. So if Trump improves in the state, it could be around 10 points or less, but it's not looking hopeful for Republicans, since they did not have good primary turnout in this area, and they are lagging behind massively in fundraising. The 5th Congressional District is the opposite case. It got slightly less Democrat after redistricting, which resulted in it voting red and the seat flipping into Republican control in the midterms. After the Democrat incumbent won by 30,000 votes and 7 points in 2020, he lost renomination in the 2022 Democrat primary to a more progressive candidate that would lose to Lori Chavez DeRaymer by 7,000 votes and 2 points in 2022. And her victory marked the first pickup of a House seat in Oregon for Republicans in a very long time. Once again, this cycle, it's a complete toss-up. Trump lost this district by 9 points, which is a fairly sizable defeat for a district that has a Republican congresswoman, but it's close enough where Republicans still have a good shot to outperform Trump down ballot, especially, once again, taking into account any improvement he makes in the state. Fundraising here looks good for Republicans, with $2.5 million raised for Congresswoman Lori versus $1 million for the Democratic nominee. But the only polls had Democrats up by 2 points when the third-party candidates were included, and only leading by 1 point, excluding the third-party candidates from the poll. It's definitely one of the best chances for the Democratic Party in the entire country to flip a House seat, but the GOP is still in a decent position to have a good shot to hold on to this seat and keep it red. The last competitive House race in Oregon can be found in the 6th Congressional District. This seat was created as a result of reapportionment of House seats following the 2020 census, where Oregon gained 1 additional congressional district. The regions within this district voted for Biden by over 13 points in 2020, but it only went blue by 2.5 points and a mere 7,000 votes in 2020 for the now Democratic incumbent, Andrea Salinas. This time around, once again, she is facing the same opponent as she did in the midterms, that being GOP nominee Mike Erickson, but he is struggling to fundraise this time, being outspent 10-1. However, the only poll of this election saw Erickson only down by 2 points, with it being a 45 to 43% deficit against Salinas. So in all likelihood, look for this to be a close election once again, and a more realistic pickup opportunity for Republicans than in the 4th Congressional District. To recap everything discussed in this video, there have been a lot of positive signs for Republicans in the state of Oregon in recent years. The demographics do not look all that unfavorable to them. The rurals have been getting redder, and the urban areas have not seen population growth. In fact, they've actually seen a population decrease, meaning that the Democratic areas are not gaining any extra influence in the state. As a result, there have been a lot of signs that Trump will make a big improvement in the state this fall. Considering that the Republicans have a realistic chance to flip the state house in Oregon, hold on to the battleground district that is the 5th congressional district in the state, and even have an outside chance at picking up an extra House seat, depending on the degree that Trump improves in Oregon, he could carry a lot of down-ballot Republicans to really important wins. So it will not only be interesting to watch Oregon on election night, to analyze how it is trending electorally into the future, but also for the here and now, to see if Republicans can not only maintain their political footprint in the state, but actually make gains and expand their influence, to have a chance to move the political and cultural future of Oregon into the right direction.